central theme today is that there is a new reality, that everything has changed, that everything is different. Some commentators have stated that the changes now occurring are the most important changes of the last 100 years. But the changes I will discuss today are new in human history, and thus I maintain that what we are now experiencing are the most significant changes ever, and thus have created a whole new situation. There is indeed a new world, one in which we have to rethink all of our assumptions and build new rules to help us understand what is happening and to help us cope with this new environment. The futurist society says that we will experience 1,000 times the amount of change in the 21st century that we experienced in the last century. In the old world, we look to experience to provide a roadmap for the present and the future. We've all heard the phrase that those who don't learn from history are bound to repeat it. But what I am going to present here is that we are experiencing a totally new situation, and knowledge of history will not help very much. In the past, firms lasted a long time, some over 500 years, and taught us important lessons for how to run organizations today. But the people passed on. Today, companies come and go in very short periods of time. They ramp up in weeks and months. Even if you have a website, your business is global, as tens of thousands of people can learn about you and your products or services virtually overnight. Now the opposite is the case. Companies die in months or a few short years, but their people survive and go on to spawn new ideas. We work multiple careers as we move from one project to another, and we are constantly having to learn new skills and competencies. In a world used to conflicts affecting thousands of soldiers and millions of people, one person or a small handful can inflict unprecedented damage. For example, the love bug computer virus, which was created by a Filipino student with a computer that he put together with throwaway pieces, or create unprecedented benefit. For example, Steve Briscoe in South Africa. Everything has become more complicated and complex. It is indeed a new world. Of course, in some ways, everything is the same. Some things are very slow to change, and many people resist the changes that are taking place. The new coexists with the old. 6 years ago, Thomas Friedman, the lead foreign correspondent for the New York Times, published a book titled The Lexus and the Olive Tree. In this book, Friedman described the new world of globalization and how globalization has become the new reality. But he also admitted that in every period of major change, such as this one, there is a backlash. A group of people who want to either deny the changes or who are totally opposed to them. Thus his title, The Lexus and the Olive Tree. Friedman's point was that many, maybe most, of the world's people are busy trying to figure out how to acquire a Lexus, the luxury car. That is, they are primarily focused on how to improve their lives. And yet, even so, some are still focused on the past, such as those who are still fighting over who owns the olive tree, as in the 3,000-year-old conflict in the Middle East over who owns the olive tree, i.e., who owns the land. These people are trying to preserve the past. Recently, Friedman published a new book titled The World is Flat. The motivation for this new book came from a statement made to him by the founder of the major Indian technology firm Infosys. I quote, "The global economic playing field is being leveled, and you, Americans, are not ready." What Friedman realized was that his framework for understanding the world was out of date. And if he didn't update his mental models, he was going to do something really stupid. Well, this is the reality for all of us. And most of us are much worse informed than is Thomas Friedman. My purpose today is to provide you with some understanding of this new world and with some ideas about how you can adapt to it and improve your organizations and their abilities to cope with it as well, so that we, you and I, don't do anything really stupid. If we take a glimpse at what people do for a living, we can begin to grasp how significant these changes are. The data I am discussing here is from the US, but most countries are following a similar path, and many are progressing down this path faster than was done in the US. Only a short time ago, that is only 100 years ago, at the turn of the last century, in the US, some 85% of the population was involved in agriculture. Maybe 10% of the working population were employed in manufacturing, and the remaining 5% were employed in some form of service job, such as working in a bank, a store, or a hotel. Within only 50 years, the situation had completely changed. By 1950, only fewer than 15% of the workforce was employed in agriculture. Most of the rest of the population, about 73%, was employed in manufacturing, a complete reversal of the reality only 50 years earlier. And fewer than 15% were involved in service work. Over the next 50 years, to the new millennium, to today, the situation changed completely again. Today, at the beginning of the 21st century, fewer than 3% of the American workforce are involved in agriculture. So few, in fact, that the U.S. Census Bureau didn't even think it was necessary to count them in its year 2000 census. But this may not be as surprising as the fact that now fewer than 15% of the labor force are employed in manufacturing. And most of those who are counted as working in manufacturing don't actually make anything. They perform some type of data service job, such as accounting, quality control, information systems, human resources, customer service, etc. Today, most of the American workforce, over 85%, is employed in service jobs, with a large portion of those jobs defined as data service jobs or leisure industry jobs. Of course, we have no shortage of goods or food to eat, even though very few people are actually making anything or growing food. As one sign of how slow people are to catch on to the changes that are occurring, even people who should understand, for example, our politicians, still seem to mostly be worried about the loss of the family farm and the loss of manufacturing jobs. Well, in this new world, almost no one lives on the farm, and very few people actually make a living making things. And some observers are convinced the changes are only beginning. For example, Tom Peters predicts that within the next 10 years, 90% of all white-collar jobs will disappear or change completely, just as happened with first agricultural jobs and then manufacturing jobs. The important point about this is that these are the jobs that most of us perform. As I say, everything has changed. So, what is creating all of this change? In general, there are 6 driving forces that are responsible for creating this new world. Today, I want to describe those 6 driving forces, and then I will describe many of the ways in which managers and the organizations they lead are changing in order to cope with this new world. And then I will close with a discussion of ways that individuals, that is you and I, can adapt to and cope with this exciting but scary new world. The 6 driving forces include the following: globalization and global competition, the technological and communication revolution, changes in global demographics, deregulation, privatization, and free trade, or what I just refer to as the relentless pressure to reduce the role of government in national and international economies. 5th force is the new source of wealth and income, and global surprises. For the rest of this first segment, I want to provide at least a short description of each of these driving forces. Our ability to effectively react and adapt to this new world is at least partially a function of the degree to which we understand these forces. So my first task is to provide some explanation of these 6 forces. Of course, all of these forces are connected and influence each other. But for the purpose of understanding them, I will focus on each separately. So first, let's take a look at globalization. What is it? As it turns out, there are probably as many definitions as there are people who write or talk about it. But for our purposes here, let's use Thomas Friedman's definition in The Lexus and the Olive Tree. Friedman says, globalization is the inexorable integration of markets, nation-states, and technologies to a degree never witnessed before, in a way that is enabling individuals, corporations, and nation-states to reach around the world farther, faster, deeper, and cheaper than ever before, and in a way that is enabling the world to reach into individuals, corporations, and nation-states farther, faster, deeper, and cheaper than ever before. In other words, globalization is the ever-increasing interacting and integrating of people, companies, and countries. People's identities are changing. That is, it is becoming increasingly difficult for many people to answer the question, where am I from? For one, they are constantly moving around. For another, their knowledge and experience enables a new understanding and appreciation for other countries and cultures. For example, when I am introduced, my identity varies a lot depending on the audience. I can be from the University of San Diego, from the city of San Diego, from California, or from the US. If I could give a talk on the moon, and is this so far away, where would I be from? The Earth? As people travel, work, and live in other countries, they begin to adopt attitudes and values different from those they grew up with. Global communication now informs all of us about the similarities and differences of our global neighbors. In addition, our ability to look at our planet from space for the first time is enabling a new perspective, one where the borders and fences are not obvious. Companies now compete with firms from all over the world. Customers, suppliers, and employees are located around the globe. Acquisitions of firms by other firms are increasingly made across national borders, to the tune of about US $1 trillion per year. And nothing escapes this globalization. It impacts all areas of our lives, our neighborhoods and our neighbors, our workplaces and co-workers, our governments, the products and services we buy and use, even our personal and national security. So why is it occurring? Of course, there are many reasons, but let me point out a few of the most important. Increased competition makes companies seek the lowest cost resources and new customers, both of which are often only available overseas. Governments often seek foreign investment, and they provide incentives to encourage firms from other countries to invest in their country. Worldwide communication and information flow and increased travel and emigration expose people to new ideas, values, and products and services from around the world. And decreased trade barriers have all contributed to globalization. So let me end the discussion of globalization with this. Consider the following questions. The answers, even just the seeking for the answers, can provide us individually and collectively insight into the importance and relevance of this topic of globalization. Question: how global is the organization where you work? How would you measure it? And secondly, how global are you? How would you measure your own personal level of globalization? How does globalization affect you? How many ways can you describe that? For the second driving force, let's take a quick look at the technological and communication revolutions. The amount of information available is now doubling every 5 years. More new knowledge has been generated in the last 50 years than in all of previous human history. In the U.S. alone, over 50,000 new books are published every year and over 400,000 journals and magazines. Over 500 billion faxes are sent every year, and they are now being replaced by trillions of emails. And while the volume and speed of communication is increasing, the cost is decreasing, so that this incredible amount of information is available to everyone, everywhere. The communication revolution has created global communication that is cheaper, faster, better, and more diversified, meaning available in more forms than ever before. It is not just magazines and newspapers and books and radio and television, although all of these are more available, cheaper, and more diverse than ever before. But it also now includes computers and the internet and cell phones. The technological revolutions that made this communication revolution possible is also occurring in virtually every field of endeavor, and in many new ones being created by great leaps forward in science and technology, and is thus also changing everything in our lives, not just the amount of information available and how we communicate, but more broadly, how we live, how we work, and how we play. There are approaching 500 million personal computers in the world, all connected to each other, and more phones may be connected to the internet than computers. The cost of computer power drops roughly 30% every year, while the performance power of microchips doubles about every 18 months. And we are on the edge of new technology that will make even these numbers obsolete. The Sony PlayStation, a toy, has more computing power than the Cray supercomputer of only 20 years ago. Every product and service is impacted by computers, even becoming computers themselves, such as our cars, our houses, and of course our toys. And the adoption of new technology is occurring faster and faster. It is indeed a new world. Third, let's examine the role of demographics. That is, the impact of population characteristics around the world. Some commentators, such as the management guru Peter Drucker, claim that this issue may indeed be the most important of all of these driving forces. For sure, it is clear that population trends influence everything else. There are two totally different realities in global demographics that are creating pressures that impact every family, business, and government decision and policy. First is the demographic reality in the countries of the developed world. Every one of them has reached the point of a declining natural population. The only countries in this group whose population is stable or maybe even slightly growing, such as the U.S., are those that accept large numbers of immigrants, legal and illegal. But for all of them, greatly reduced birth rates, starting some 40 years ago, have created rapidly aging populations today with all the consequences of that. one of which is a shrinking labor force, with the result that there is a shortage of workers in developed countries, particularly skilled and educated workers. The 15 to 35-year-old age group is shrinking, while the 45 to 65-year-old age group continues to grow. And of course, the numbers over 65 will increase very rapidly over the next 20 to 30 years. Indeed, even now, more are retiring from the labor force every year than are entering it. This is a new reality that has never been faced by any country in the world before, and therefore there is no blueprint on how to deal with it. It has created a global war for talent that will only become more and more difficult to win. The other reality, of course, and the opposite reality, is the huge young populations of the developing world. Even with their lowering birth rates, they will continue for many years to have to cope with all the consequences of a huge young population and a huge number of new entrants to the labor force. Emigration and immigration may provide some of the balance between these two realities, as may sending work from developed to developing countries, and for the developed countries, the increasing use of technology, such as robots, to get work done. But problems created by these demographic realities create the need to find new ways to deal with things like changes in family life, education, schools, consumption patterns, retirement and pension programs and systems, demands for health care, and increasing diversity of populations. And there are no guides as to how countries and companies and individuals should deal with these issues. Responses based on our past experiences do not provide workable answers. These demographics are new, and they change everything. Fourth, let me at least mention the impact of the pressures to limit the role of government in the economy. For many years, politicians and political economists have been pursuing policies pretty much worldwide to get government out of the role of running the economy, both within countries and between countries. This pressure has led to other pressures, such as for deregulation of industries like transportation and banking in the U.S., to privatization of government-owned enterprises, which is being pursued in most countries, and expanded free trade between countries, with first GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and now WTO, the World Trade Organization, and of course with regional and bilateral free trade agreements, such as the European Union, the North American Free Trade Agreement, now the new Central American Free Trade Agreement, the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, etc. These pressures change the nature of economic and government institutions and the relationships between them, both within countries and between countries. At a minimum, these pressures have made it possible for firms from everywhere to infiltrate each other's territories as never before. Again, everything has changed. Nothing is as it was. And for our mental models to continue to try to understand the world through the prism of our past experience will not provide us with workable solutions to today's problems. The fifth driving force involves the fact that there is today a total in human history source of wealth and income. Through all the rest of human history, wealth was based on the physical ownership and or control of physical goods, such as land, gold, oil, buildings, or inventory of goods. Individuals, companies, and countries built their wealth through access to and ownership and control of these physical goods. But today, the wealthiest people in the world, such as Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, and firms such as Microsoft, Google, Cisco, Apple, Intel, and countries such as Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, own or control primarily or only intellectual property or human capital. This is new, and it means that the routes to success today and into the future for individuals, firms, and countries is to invest in people, not in the creation or accumulation of physical goods. Sure, of course, oil and gold are still important, but the new route to wealth and fortune and fame is through intellectual property and human ability. And lastly, I would argue that a force I refer to as global surprises is driving many of the changes we are experiencing and that are creating this totally new world. These are events that are unanticipated, they have global impact, and they change everything. These are events such as the fall of the Berlin Wall on 11/9, as the U.S. states it, and the end of communism, the attacks in the U.S. on, interestingly, 9/11, again as the U.S. refers to it, one event of which opened windows, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the other which closed windows. The SARS epidemic, Asian financial crisis, and it includes unanticipated natural events and their global consequences, such as the enlarging hole in the ozone layer, global warming, and the recent tsunami in Southeast Asia. These events are so new we don't even seem to be able to comprehend them or their consequences, let alone figure out a strategy for dealing with them. It seems to take real and major crises, take for example AIDS and global warming, for us to seek solutions. But by the time we experience the consequences of the crises, it is often too late. Responding this way in the past has been okay. But today, because of things like global travel and trade, ever-growing populations in some areas and shrinking populations in others, and global communication and backlash, responses based on past experience no longer seem to be adequate. When the effects of these 6 driving forces are combined, the result is a totally new world, where everything has changed, and it, of course, is continuing to change. Every aspect of our lives has been and is continuing to be impacted. And the only way we can understand and adapt to these continuing and all-encompassing changes, which are occurring at an ever-increasing rate, and with seemingly ever-enlarging scope and increasing danger, is to continually learn, both as individuals and organizations. We must organize our attitudes, our organizations, and our lives to enhance our ability to learn and to enhance our actual learning. The only sustainable advantage any person or organization or country has today is to learn faster than the competition, whether that is competition for jobs and work, or competition between companies, or competition between countries, or even competition between ideologies. So, given this reality where everything has changed, organizations and management are now faced with a new ballgame of productivity and competition. Those that are able to understand these new dynamics will survive. Those that refuse to accept their existence or fail to understand their impact and consequences will lag behind and eventually disappear. This presentation provides for all of you a good starting point to avoid falling into this group of future failures. If you develop key global competencies, I assure you and your organization's great success in this new reality. Thank you.